Brady. I'm here with Geoff Smart of ghSMART. And Geoff, first of all, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here, Diane.
So I was intrigued when I saw the latest Vault rankings that you were number one in how many categories? 9 or 10?
10. We were pleased to have placed number one in 4 categories this last few years, but we picked up 6 more for a total of 10 number ones.
And this is for management consultancy. And what's interesting is everything from most selective to best work-life balance. So I think that's intriguing. But let's start with what exactly you do. Like, who hires you? 'Cause it's always this enigmatic, like, leadership consultancy, management consultancy.
Yes.
What makes somebody pick up the phone and say, I need Geoff Smart?
What's a consultant? A consultant is someone who helps you solve a problem. And I think the different consulting firms group themselves by type of problem. So your strategy consulting firms typically, and over the years, have helped people who run or own large organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, help them figure out answers to what questions, like what products and services should we offer, what should we charge for the price of tea in China, what supply chain stuff. You have the technology consulting firms, right, which help implement technology
digital
solutions.
Transformation.
Correct. We don't do any of that. So at ghSMART, we solve who problems. And so that was a bit of a pioneering move on our part back in the day, way back when.
What was your first book?
My first book was called Who, which is about hiring, and that was 15 years ago we published. Still number one on Amazon. I checked yesterday, sort of OCD every day just to make sure we're not falling out of relevance. But it's a top-selling book in the world on hiring, which is considered kind of a hot topic these days. And
so you started the consultancy around the who, and it's not just the hiring part, it's also the optimization part of who, right?
That's right. And we're very careful with the wording here. So I'm against the idea of how to motivate your employees, how to get the most out of your people. I hate that framing. I think it's...
Why? Does it productize us too much?
It sounds coercive. It sounds like employees and colleagues are just there as instruments of value creation for these sort of nameless, faceless owners of companies. So I don't like that part. But yes, identifying and developing talented teams is what we do, in addition to helping people who run or own these large organizations figure out who to hire, figure out essentially how to get the right people behind these concepts that are going to drive forward valuable.
So it's
businesses.
Large companies, maybe government organizations. So basically you run the gamut of clients.
It's heavily private sector focused, and we do a lot of pro bono work with governments. Some of the most fun work I've personally done in the last few years is helping newly elected governors hire their cabinets. There's this intense sprint. They get elected in November. They've got sort of 6 weeks to make some of the most important hiring decisions of their lives. These hires are agency heads and people who will end up either literally saving lives or not. In the case of public safety or human services, there's a lot at stake, and there are these high stakes hiring decisions. On the private sector side, we have a private equity and sort of financial services bent with about a third of our clients. We sort of came from those roots, and then they're just sort of pick your favorite big industries, the life sciences, engineering, consumer packaged goods, et cetera.
So, full disclosure, I've spent a brief stint at McKinsey, and I would think that if you are, coming out of school, for example, there's a natural tendency to think of the big guys, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. What makes somebody want to go to ghSMART?
That's a great question. And that was the haunting question 27 years ago when I was a wee grad student out at Claremont in Los Angeles, where Peter Drucker, that sort of reigning...
Yeah, like Godfather of management.
That's right. So he was my professor. He was only... I didn't know then, obviously, but 3 years before he passed. So I caught him right at the end of his amazing life. And I wrote a business plan for ghSMART. And the business plan was, since you mentioned McKinsey, and by the way, McKinsey and Company, ghSMART and Company, there was some emulation in the early days here. But the business plan I wrote for Peter Drucker for a class on ghSMART was essentially to say, hey, look, influential leaders rely on different sets of advisors. You have top law firms, you have the strategy firms, you have the accounting firms, all these advisors, but where's the advisor who's helping the leaders make good people decisions? So I wanted to bring a more fact-based approach to making good people decisions. And Peter Drucker asked the same exact question you just asked at the very beginning. He said, I buy the unmet need in the market, right? Helping provide analytics and better decision-making to help leaders lead better. However, I'm not sure how you're going to attract the people to do that level of work. And he sat there and sort of looked at me. And I remembered he had coined the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right.
So Dan, I sort of humbly said, well, I think it has to do with the culture that we build. Because the answer to the question, how you can attract folks out of these top firms to come work at our little popcorn stand.
So what did you do differently? Let's go back to Geoff Smart.
Wind it back.
27 years or whatever period you want to start in terms of when you're building the firm.
It was a humble beginning. As Professor Drucker mentioned, he said, I don't know any, he was talking about me. He said, you don't know anything. You've raised no money. You have no clients. How in the world are you going to get this thing started? Mm-hmm. So on the intellectual property side, actually, I wrote a PhD dissertation on how venture capitalists make decisions about who to invest in. Mm-hmm. And I correlated that. Since this is Forbes, we can talk financial returns.
We love financial. Go ahead.
So watch this. So I took psychology principles of how to evaluate and get to know someone. And then I looked at the returns on different deals.
ROI.
Correct.
Right.
And Diane, there was nothing would have happened, no ghSMART, if there was sort of no finding. Okay, psychology doesn't matter. How you evaluate and bet on entrepreneurs doesn't matter. However you do it, you make 20% IRR, call it a day. Instead, I found there are these different categories where, weirdly, if investors followed by accident largely some of these best practices out of psychology for how to get to know someone, those folks made 4 times the returns of people who took sloppier kind of gut feel methods of evaluating management teams. So I took that show on the road, started making presentations at private equity conferences, and so demand generated. Now on the culture side, it was right around the time when email and cell phones became accepted business practice around 1995. I was 23. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm 50 today, so it's a million years ago. But I basically told some of the early colleagues, hey, look, you're super talented. You believe in leadership and the power of good leadership for being a force for good in the world. So the kind of work you're going to get to do here is that sort of impact work. You can do the work wherever you want.
So you were remote in 1995.
Correct.
Wow.
We were full remote 95. And that's mostly because we had no money, no offices. I mean, it wasn't like,
So it's hard to build culture remotely. That's one of the things I hear now from a lot of leaders.
I really appreciate that point and question. The weird thing is we've always been remote, and yet, across the 10 Vault number ones, best overall satisfaction. I mean, the culture gets mentioned a lot. Also on Glassdoor, which I think is a pretty decent anonymous crowdsourced sort of ratings of company culture at 4.8 out of 5. That scores the top one in the industry. And then, as if those 2 platforms weren't enough, there's this great place to work survey thing where some of the sort of most